Is George Lucas a good director? Well, let's take a look at some of his movies. The first one let's take a look at here is, of course, Star Wars. And we know George Lucas has made more than one movie. We're not going to look at all of his movies today, but we are going to look at Star Wars. And, of course, then we also want to look at some of the other movies that he's produced and his style of directing, as well as his personality, his vision, and his moral agenda, if you will. And then how he likes to tell a story and the kind of characters he likes to embrace as he paints a picture for us, the audience. And then that's the story he tells, and that's the kind of storyteller he is. And so what kind of director is George Lucas? Is George Lucas a good director? Is George Lucas a bad director? Well, one thing for sure is George Lucas is a director. Now, whether or not he's a good director, or whether you like his work as he's produced it, he's directed it, as he's finished it, as he calls it a wrap, well, then that's up to you. But regarding whether or not George Lucas is a good director, well, let's go ahead and take a look at the prequels. Let's take a look at Star Wars. Episodes 1, 2, and 3. And of course, we know episodes 4, 5, and 6. These all came out in 1977 and moving forward toward the time we are at now. And of course, at that time in 1977, no one had ever seen anything like that. And those of us that saw that and experienced that in theaters in 1977, as I did at age 10, you will know and you will remember that we never saw anything like that before in our entire lives. Nothing. And it was absolutely amazing. It was incredible. I loved it. My friends loved it. Or at least I hung around with anybody that loved it. And it's the first time I ever saw anything in the movies that I couldn't believe I was looking at. But now, let's take a look now and go on now to 1998 and The Phantom Menace. And George Lucas, again, changing the world twice. First time he did it in 1977, the original trilogy, Star Wars, A New Hope. Back in those days, we just called it Star Wars. And then, of course, The Empire Strikes Back. We never saw anything like this before in our time. Now, George was basing this on his love for the serial and the Buck Rogers genre, so to speak, and that type of a character. The galaxy-hopping, thrill ride, seat-of-your-pants, serialized adventure that you would go and see weekly at the theaters. And George grew up with this, and he loved it. And he also loves fast cars, and he loves action and adventure, and he always liked the cowboy movies, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot more to it than that. Of course, there's the hero's journey and the hero of 1,000 faces, and so on and so forth. But George is a certain type of person. He's a certain type of personality. And just to offhandedly remark, because you didn't like the way a movie was made, well, George is a bad director, or George is a terrible director, and objectively you can see the prequels are terrible. And objectively, this movie's good, and objectively, that movie's bad. Well, yeah, objectively, by your subjective view on that standard or that metric, as you would put it. For instance, take a look at cinematography. Of course, we know that George is the ultimate vision of this particular movie here, Episode 1. So we're going to take a look at Star Wars Episode 1. And then Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And then, of course, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And all of these movies look different, feel different, and are different from the original trilogy. One of the reasons for this is, in the original trilogy, George was telling a story that was taking place after the stories now that we're looking at now, episodes 1, 2, and 3. As episodes 4, 5, and 6 came out in 1977, starting in 77 and then going through, I believe, 1983, I think, possibly 82. And then I'll have to look at the dates on that. And then, of course, the prequels came out in 1998. And then moving forward, I'm pretty sure that's when they came out. We'll have to look at the dates on that. And then, now here we are in our time, as of the time of this recording, which is 2024. The prequels, beginning with The Phantom Menace, are now seen as epic, all-time classic masterpiece film productions. And if they don't, then come on, man, they're not looking at the facts. Now, you can argue and you can ask and you can debate, is George Lucas a good director? Is George Lucas a bad director? Fine, go ahead, do it. But one thing you're not going to deny or debate is that he is a director. George Lucas is a director. And if you like his work or not, fine. That's between you and yourself and, I guess, the director. But to say that the director's a bad director, or even a good director, just because you liked that director's work or you didn't like that director's work, as in the case of George, because you liked his work or you didn't like his work, well, come on, man. It doesn't get any more subjective than that. And if you want to use an objective rubric, standard measurement, measuring ruler, whatever it is you want to use, let's start with cinematography. George Lucas brilliantly frames this picture for us, this new world that we're seeing of Star Wars. We saw the original trilogy. And then now we're seeing the prequel trilogy. And now everybody's making prequels, by the way. Everybody's doing prequels. Everybody's talking about prequel this, prequel that. Oh, the sequel trilogy, the prequel trilogy. Everybody's making prequels now. Nobody was making prequels before George made the prequel trilogy. Yeah, you'd have every now and then something, but it was always, think about it, George was at the forefront of a lot of this, even with the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, as we're moving forward, which was actually a prequel to Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so on and so forth. And then here with George now, we see the prequels, and we see George again, only this time he's adding characters, he's changing the look. As a matter of fact, speaking of changing the look, Attack of the Clones is the first movie ever to be filmed entirely on digital film, so to speak. Not film, but filmed digitally. And digital film, if you will. George Lucas is an innovator, but George innovates and actually invents and spurs on and motivates creation and invention and new design in order to tell his stories. It's about the story, friends. It's not about the special effects or the explosion, although those are a lot of fun. If you look at the prequels, especially take a look at Revenge of the Sith, how that movie opens up, man, you've never seen anything like that. And if you have, you probably saw it in a Nintendo 64. Well, just joking around, but seriously, a lot of the advances that we have in both cell phone technology, smartphone technology, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever, any type of movie you can imagine, from the MCU to whatever, The Irishman, it's all due to Lucasfilm, George Lucas, and Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar is the key. You like your Instagram, you like your Snapchat? Well, Jar Jar is the key. You can thank George Lucas again. And a lot of the technology that we have and a lot of the ideas and concepts that our world is now based on and now operates based on is indeed based on some of the concepts and some of the ideas presented in Star Wars as fictional literature, as we read it as fictional literature, but now we're seeing it in operational design as a reality of our world, such as with the Star Wars missile defense system, and so on and so forth. But we don't want to get sidetracked because we're really asking the question, is George Lucas a good director? Well, if you want to base it on the prequels, which we are, George Lucas is a great director. Well, take a look at this. Somebody said, what about the clunky dialogue? Yeah, what about it? How about it? What about the clunky dialogue? Take a look at this. How about the clunky dialogue in the original trilogy? You want to go clunky dialogue versus clunky dialogue? It's all clunky. This goes here, that goes there. Come on, man, that's not clunky. No, it's because I'm so in love with you. Yeah, I know it's clunky. He's telling the story. If you don't like it, tell your own. Make your own movie. Do it the way you want to do it. In the meantime, George is telling the story in the way he wants to tell it. And looks to me like he told it in the most effective way possible. The story of Anakin and Padme is a story of love and tragedy, set in the midst of a world of politics and war. And these lovers are star-crossed. Across the galaxy they met, by chance almost, it would seem. But, according to Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace, it was the will of the Force. Now, is this actually the will of the Force? You will watch the movies and you will see. But we're looking at these movies as a text written or presented, as we put it, designed and presented, produced as a film, and presented to us, given to us by the creator, George Lucas. And you can see this in all the books. You can see this in the EU. You can see this in Legacy in the comic books, going all the way back to the Marvel comic books. Friends, this is Star Wars, but it's based on the original creator, the original design. The original design of the original creator, and that is George Lucas. And now I know we have all kinds of other movies coming along that are based on other people's visions and other designs and other ideas and concepts and agendas, moral agendas, so to speak. But when it comes right down to it, we all know, I know it, and you know it. There has been no awakening. No, there's been no awakening. I know it and you know it. George Lucas is the master creator and the master maker of this universe. And anything created by George Lucas that's in the Star Wars universe is real Star Wars, especially the prequels. Come on, man. George was surrounded by yes men. Yes people, if you will. In the original trilogy, he wasn't surrounded by yes men, and he wasn't surrounded by people that only said yes to him. In this one, the prequels, you better believe it, baby. Everybody said yes. And therefore, we got to get Jar Jar Binks, the funniest of all the characters we've ever had. Look at it. Just look at him. This guy's straight out of Looney Tunes. It's basically Roger Rabbit in space, if you will. But also one of the most intelligent and highly insightful, very insightful characters, most insightful, I would add, of all the characters we've ever had in Star Wars, any of the Star Wars episodes. For one thing, he doesn't even know how he got in this adventure. When asked by Padme, how did you get here? He says, man, I don't even know. I was having breakfast, and the next thing you know, I met this Jedi, and now here I am. And that's basically his story. And then, of course, excuse me. The prequels have all the best lines. And, of course, we see the friendship between Anakin and Obi-Wan develop. We see the training of a student underneath a master, a mentor, a teacher, a master Jedi, if you will. We see the world and the culture of the politics of that time. We see the world and the culture and the politics of the Republic and of the Jedi Order. And also we see the various personalities and the various types of personalities that are within the Jedi Order and this world in which we see our friends, the heroes, the Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. And then we see the villains, Darth Maul, Darth Sidious hidden under a cloak that we know now is Chancellor Palpatine. And of course, the Phantom Menace, Chancellor Palpatine is still a Senator Palpatine. Senator Palpatine has political aspirations, goals, and he's willing to do anything to get it. He says, and we see this now, I will be Chancellor. That's his goal, that's his mission, is to become the Chancellor. And I know a lot of people didn't like that. Politics, they didn't like the politics in these movies. The prequels has a lot of politics. The original trilogy has a lot of politics. The original trilogy is all about politics. It's a world based on politics, infused with politics. Only we see it more out there in front now. It's in the forefront now in this world. In the world of the prequels, the politics is there. The politics is in the language. The politics, even Obi-Wan and Anakin are talking about politics as they're even providing protection to Padme Amidala, who is now, of course, Senator Amidala, after having served 2 terms as the Queen of Naboo. And we met first Padme Amidala as both a handmaid, in disguise as a handmaid, and then, of course, as Queen Amidala, ruler of the Naboo, we met the Gungan people, the Gungan race, I should say. They're not people, they're amphibian. It's an amphibian race. These are amphibians that are, Jar Jar has orange ears, very odd looking indeed. And as C-3PO points out, speaking again for the audience, this Jar Jar is a very odd type, he's a very odd fellow. And then, of course, Jar Jar is the every person in the room. It's the first time we've ever had a character as funny as Jar Jar, doesn't even know what he's doing in the adventure. I do believe, and I've said it and I'll say it again, we have seen George Lucas write himself into the story. At last, finally, George has written himself into one of the Star Wars stories, one of the episodes. And here we see Jar Jar Binks. Very insightful. He asks a lot of insightful questions. He asks a lot of questions that move the story to the next step. We see the first meeting between the Naboo, the people that live on this planet, and the Gungan people, race, the Gungan race, if you will. And Jar Jar Binks is one of the funniest characters we've ever seen and we've ever been introduced to in any movie, let alone the Star Wars movie, especially any Star Wars movie. Never seen a character like this where the tone will be totally serious and then all of a sudden it'll just switch over and become funny because of something Jar Jar does. It's pratfall humor. It's a lot of childlike humor. And I do believe George wrote this character for children, and I do believe George wrote this character so that he could finally be in one of the Star Wars episodes. And that's my opinion. I haven't actually talked to George about it, but maybe he can confirm or disconfirm that theory that I have. Now, moving on. How about the music? Man, I'm telling you, beautiful. This is John Williams at the top of his game, and I'll leave it at that, except to say that in Attack of the Clones it gets better, and Revenge of the Sith it gets even better. Now, we've seen, of course, the music throughout these movies, in Star Wars, New Hope, and then The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and then The Phantom Menace, and then Attack of the Clones, and then finally Revenge of the Sith. In all of these movies, you have music that will carry with it this idea of moving the story along. And I will say that the Jedi Temple March in Revenge of the Sith is one of the greatest suites ever produced. Not to mention Duel of the Fates, all-time epic choreographed fight scene, as well as musical score. And then, of course, we do know that all of the music comes as John Williams watches these movies. And George has created these beautiful pictures and these beautiful images for John to look at and score music to by watching these movies. And so we know they work wonderfully as a team, and we see it again here in the prequels. So again, is George a great director? Absolutely. Based on the prequels, 100%, baby. And again, we want to say that we're talking about the prequels and asking the question, is George Lucas a good director? Based on the prequels? You better believe it, baby. The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars, the prequels, Episodes 1, 2, and 3, written and directed by George Lucas. Producer, Rick McCollum. Executive producer, George Lucas. And that's all the time we have for today, dear friends. Remember, your focus determines your reality. May the Force be with us.